time. So Miles, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you to everybody for joining this this fireside chat about building a great insight-driven organization. By way of introduction, as Sonia said, I'm Miles Drayton. I lead the global brand insights function at Mondelez International. For those of you who don't know who Mondelez International is, think of Oreo, Nabisco, Cadbury, Toblerone, all of the snacking brands that many folks know and love. And this topic is interesting for me because my background is not originally from insights. My background comes from marketing and from strategy, and then has spent the last 5 odd years in insights. So to me, I have an outside in, but an inside out view on what great insights driven organizations look like. I've also worked at Johnson & Johnson as well, and experienced a fantastic insights led team over there as well. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll go through just a few slides to explain sort of at least our perspective at Mondelez on what makes a great insight-led organization, and then open to questions afterwards. So first of all, I mean, I think the consumer is most definitely the hot topic right now. If you know, what I did is I took a look at the last 20 last presentations from all of the leading CPG and food and beverage manufacturers, whether they're presenting in CAGNY, or whether they're doing in their annual reviews, or in their strategy sessions, or in their principles. You start to see the same words come up in that speech bubble. Consumer always comes up there. Consumer centricity, putting the consumer first. The consumer is our boss. Being consumer centric. Understanding the customer. Some use customer and consumer. You know, they trade those names. So there's definitely a strong hot topic for being consumer first across a number of different organizations. But that's a lot of lip service. So the hard part is, you know, they're saying these things and getting them done is often harder to do. And there's a couple of things that actually have created that pressure. There is a number of headwinds that I would say that prevent a company from driving towards a strong consumer-centric insights-led organization. And it ranges from the tactical, but also to the cultural. On the one side, unclear return on investment of insights is an important consideration. It's often harder for particularly financially led organizations to get a very clear picture of what the ROI of insights are. I always like to say that if you turned off insights today, you wouldn't feel anything immediately. But if you turned off but within a matter of months, and especially in a matter of years, your business would significantly suffer, because insights feeds the background of all innovation, all commercial activation, all marketing communications, all forecasting. You know, it's all of that rests. Great work in those areas rest on strong insights. The other one that often comes up is ineffective insights, and this can be partly tied to the platforms that we use, but also the skill set of our insights people. And that for me is insights that come off to our key stakeholders as meh. You know, okay, I get it, but what am I supposed to do about it? So the insights themselves don't pack a punch, and that leads to the organization believing that insights isn't as effective as it could be. The third part, and many researchers would know this one very well, is all about resource constraints, whether that's financial resources or whether that's people. Especially now as we exit quite a long drawn era of 3G and strong cost cutting to try and drive up productivity. Insights was a very strong victim of a lot of resource constraints over the past 5 years. And I think that ties to the first two bullets, is that if financial teams can't see the ROI of insights, then it makes it harder for us to justify holding on to them during a resource-constrained period of time. The fourth one for us is all about network partnership. So making sure that if you don't partner effectively with your teams, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail in the next charts, you don't necessarily answer the question or delight your stakeholder enough to really see that insights can really drive the agenda. Financial and time pressure, particularly time pressure, often happens to us. Marketers will say, I really have to be in the market with this creative copy in the next 3 months, and I just need to have this to prove that it's not a bad copy, and not a lot of lead time, and please can we just go. So that often puts insights under pressure if we don't want to retest something, we don't want to pay for retesting, or we don't want to spend the time doing it. And finally is the organizational culture. There are different cultures that come across different companies. Whether it's a sales-led organization that leads to much more short-termism insights, much more analytics draw, whether it's a marketing organization where it's much more driven towards creative and driving commercial activation, but perhaps not necessarily linking close enough to the consumer in how we validate a lot of those actions. Or whether it's a financially led organization where you have to prove your ROI. A lot of those types of cultures, each one has its positives and its negatives, but a lot of them can present headwinds for us in terms of driving consumer centricity. So it's quite easy to take a look at this and say, well, it's quite depressing. There's a lot of barriers in front of us to try and unlock a consumer first culture. But actually there are, for me, 3 key things that would drive better insight-led decisions in an organization. And these are the things that we're focusing on at Mondelez quite a lot. The first is building up a really solid foundation. So those assets that we have, we call them assets because that's really what they are. I mean, they are a set of core insight tools that we have that help us drive consumer-first decisions across a number of different stakeholders, right? Because I&A, or Insights and Analytics as we call it, I&A feeds insights to so many parts of the business that it's critical that we have an adequate set of assets, almost like a portfolio of tools that address a lot of those business challenges. And the way I like to think about it is we have to almost think of our insights assets as brands, as internal brands in the company. We have to launch them, we have to nurture them, and we have to make sure that they're continually innovative and they're continuing to address the needs of the customer, which in this case is our key stakeholders, but treating them like brands, launching them and behaving them like brands. So what are the key steps that could be considered around building those foundational assets? Is first, start with an audit. Make sure that you understand all of the various assets you have. You probably might find duplication or weaker based tools. So be clear on what is critical and what is not. And what is critical, make sure that you have almost a maturity model for each of these. In my role in global, we obviously look across all of the markets, and we're able to look at our portfolio of insights tools and start to say, well, how well embedded are they across the regions? How well supported are they financially? How well prioritized are they versus other things that they could be spending on, both within the research pillar, but also in other functions such as marketing or sales. So making sure that you have a really strong set of tools that your stakeholders would say, I cannot live without this. This feeds the foundation of my knowledge of my consumer in my country. So setting that vision then to know where you're weak and where you're strong, and building up those platforms and guiding your insights teams in the regions to say, you're under investing in this area because this is a missing component of your platform. You need to be building this up. You may be over investing in certain places. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the foundational knowledge assets we have in Mondelez that we use to try and make sure that we tell the right story for how we adequately represent our consumer or our shopper, but also how we defend our budgets against financial pressure. If we want to cut something, do we cut in marketing? Do we cut in insights? This is also a very strong way of helping push for that. The second key element is team skills and capabilities. This one's almost an obvious one that you would assume, but it's all about that, the ability of your talent to influence the agenda. And often, if you look at a maturity of an insights team, you'll find that we have different tiers. You go from, frankly, being an order taker or being a validator of insights. Does it tick the box, or does it cross on the box of consumer acceptance? That's the very basic and the very foundational, right up to the strategic business partner. And we're measuring ourselves along that spectrum and saying, across all of our teams, where are we in our maturity? Making sure that we train and we even select and hire the right talent that can really push the agenda, because you don't simply want somebody who's behaving more like an order taker. You want to be able to have somebody who's actually dissatisfied with the current state of things and wants to adequately change things, and is looking for ways to influence their stakeholders to make sure that they stay core to being close to our consumers. So similar to the way you do your knowledge assets, assess your teams, assess their skills and capabilities, and then create also a stakeholder engagement map. That's important because you want to make sure that you're adequately addressing the right teams, and that will also go into how you structure your I&A organization to be outward focused, to make sure that you are partnering effectively with your key stakeholders. And then finally, on business partnership, it's similar to teams and capabilities, but it's a little bit deeper. This is how closely embedded your I&A team is to its stakeholders. Almost so that you are seen as a pod, seen as one of the business teams, and relied upon as a trusted insights partner to deliver strategic as well as operational feedback. So making sure that your teams have the skills to be able to embed themselves, the networking capabilities to do it, and for them to actually anticipate a lot of the questions versus react to a lot of the questions. So that takes a lot of interviews with your key stakeholders, understanding their expectations, almost a roadshow of sorts, where you have to make sure that you're assessing very deeply, are they gaining a lot of value? At Mondelez, we put out an annual survey to our key stakeholders, and we asked to be judged on how well we're delivering against both operational, commercial, and strategic goals for them. How well are we partnering with them? And then, of course, through your annual reviews that you do, you will also be getting feedback from your stakeholders about how the team is performing. So those three elements combined, when built together, will enable you to drive a very inspired, insight-led organization. A little update in terms of how Mondelez is approaching this. We're treating each of these as equally important. And on the foundational knowledge assets part, we've identified 10 core platforms that we want to run out globally. And that can be related to core deliverables like market mix modeling, making sure that our coverage is adequate, looking at our retail audit coverage, which can sometimes be too much or can not be enough depending on the countries that we look at. It can be looking at snacking-based studies, like we have. We obviously deploy demand spaces across all of the world, and making sure that is being adequately used and embedded. We also, in those platforms, is things like brand health, making sure that we are adequately covering our most important brands with strong brand health metrics. And then creative measurement is another one inside there, making sure that we are following a standard protocol for how we measure our TV and our digital advertising, and making sure that we're following the right platform for doing that, and that we're testing where we need to test in the right places. So all of these become your elements where you move towards making sure that the teams themselves understand what's required in each of the countries. So a country can see themselves up against another country and say, well, my shopper development, my shopper 5S studies are not as strong as embedded as other markets. So that's the path for me to get to much stronger shopper centricity, because it's one of the core foundational platforms that we have. And then also behind that, each one of those, we're looking at how we do it. So it's not simply about outsourcing everything. We have hybrid models and in-house models for each one of those. So whether we choose to do demand spaces partly in-house and partly outsourced, the type of agreements we have with our agencies and our suppliers differ, and making sure that we're thinking about efficiencies in each of those, but also getting the right quality coming out is one of the things that we're doing for each platform. And then behind all of that, we're focusing on the fact that these should not be treated like islands. They should be potentially blended at some point in the future. And we're building out what we call a data lake, which enables us to get one INA, one insights and analytics data infrastructure, so that we can start cross-tabulating across all of these. We can see how penetration is driven by great creative, how market share is also driving penetration. You name it, we can look at how 5S influences our innovation platforms, etc. So there's a lot of that knitting of things together, and that's truly where what comes into the next blue area, the team skills and capabilities, becomes so critical. In that we're building a maturity model to understand all of our Mondelez Insights talent. This is still being developed, but is being launched soon, where a strong capability assessment is going to be able to tell us what is the tailored solution that we need to do for each of our talent. And then we're looking at leadership skill growth areas as well. So for example, storytelling for impact. And that can range from how to impact in a business environment, so how to impact in meetings, how to be present, but it can also be as tactical as how to set up a chart, how to tell a story cleanly, doing a lot more one-to-one workshops on that area. Then finally, on the business partnership side, we're embedding a lot of those insight platforms, those 10 insight platforms, into the ways of working that we have as a company, whether that's through the KPIs, whether it's through regular dashboards that come out, whether it's through the approaches and methodology that we take in terms of, if you're going to be briefing an agency, you need to be following this protocol. All of that enables the teams really to almost automatically adopt consumer feedback and shopper feedback all the way through the processes. Teams are being structured more firmly together. So we are under the marketing leadership pillar, which is the biggest customer we have. But we're also linking very closely on working pods and specific project task teams. INA is always central to that, and making sure that we're picking the right talent that goes into each one of those pods is a critical consideration. And then finally, focusing on training and influencing and partnering. So sort of that softer element, which is often, the hardest thing for teams to do, is, getting those soft skills right. So finally, and hopefully this will sort of bring it all together, and then we'll open up for some questions, is first of all, do you have the right foundation? Do you have the tools, the platforms, the assets that are broad enough across multiple disciplines? And we have obviously multiple different functions that serve insights, that insight serves. So making sure that it is holistic, it is progressive. So you're not just doing backward looking, you're also looking at forward looking tools such as social listening, trend scoping, all of those, or real-time or future-looking studies, not just past. Have you got the right engagement model with the business? So making sure that your team is firmly embedded in each one of the key business operation elements, key business meetings, making sure that it's linked, that there is representation across the different teams as well. Mapping out with them whether they're satisfied, dissatisfied, what they're looking for and what's missing. Is important. And then finally, finally but not least, does your insight team have those magic elements to drive impact? We always like to think of insights folks as data storytellers or data journalists, those that can blend data and the science with the art of influencing a lot of the outcomes our users and can tell stories simply and powerfully. So they have to be seen, and what that drives is credible, trusted partners, and those that can really, bring direction and influence the result, and make sure that all actions we take in the company are linked very closely to consumer empathy. So I believe that's that's the overall overview. Open to any questions you may have in the chat box.
Yes. Thank you very much, Miles,
Sure.
for the presentation. And now we want to open the floor for the Q&A. So if you would like to ask a question to Miles, you can use or the chat function, or you can also use raise hand button, and we will bring you live to ask questions to Miles. And I can already hear Jeffrey asking questions.
Yeah, I've seen the question from Jeffrey. Thank you. It's funny. It depends on the supplier. Our best suppliers are doing what you're saying. They are very collaborative. They're the ones that are often instigating thought leadership. They're driving us to consider new ways of working. They're always thinking almost one step ahead of us and saying, look, through other agencies, or we're building on this, we'd like to partner with you on this. We'd like you to join us on a forum that has other non-competitive agencies there to talk about specific elements. So the good ones are doing it. For some of the other ones, you have to push, and you have to say, and even if you push, it still doesn't work, I have to say, so, you have to, and that's when really you have to start looking at whether you have the right agency, because in each of those 10 core platforms, we obviously make sure that our suppliers are ideally global, but it's not always possible. And we're wanting to make sure that they are delivering incremental benefits. So it's not like it's a one and done. We always revisit those suppliers and saying, are they doing the best possible job for us?
Perfect. Thank you, Miles. There's a next question from Sandra. Can you elaborate more on how are you helping the team to improve their influencing
skills? Yeah, sure. So it's through a number of different elements. Firstly, it's through what you would call almost sort of classic training skills. So it's things like forums on influencing skills, hearing from senior insights leaders in the company about what makes a great influencer. It's also through influential storytelling, so the right type of communication. So making sure that your presentations are punchy, are effective, they drive towards the right conclusions, they don't have a lot of clutter in them, they're almost positioned a little bit more like the way a consultancy would lead it. And then thirdly, which is probably the one that we're maybe a little bit more dispersed about and need to get better on, is one-to-ones with your manager, making sure that they are actively involved in driving that. And it varies depending on the leaders that we have, and it's not as formalized, for example. So that's probably an area we're still going to keep growing on. But it can be as simple as going right down to an individual slide and saying, how would this slide, this one visualization that I have, be more impactful? And that's something that's being set up right now. It's almost going to be like, bring your presentation, and we can go through it with a rubber pen and just basically say, look, try drop this, try that, try bring this out. So trying to make it as practical as possible versus as preachy as sometimes these trainings can come across as.
Perfect, thank you. We have also a question from Suzanne. Do you feel like as more work moves in-house, meaning brands do research themselves, any of this dynamic change? Any new skills, any new pressures?
Definitely. I mean, I would say, well, first of all, not everything's going to move in-house, because there are certain tools and skill sets and capabilities that are better served for us to keep out-house. But where we start to identify repetitive tasks, nothing specialized in it, that's when we need to go in-house. That definitely drives a different type of talent. The first is the ability to mine data and be able to pull out stories is so much harder when you're doing it in house, and that requires somebody who has a very keen eye on that type of skill, um, on being able to extract the right stories. It requires the speed for that person to be able to effectively mine data versus outsourcing it, because the first question is, well, if you do this, then you're not going to have time to influence because you're going to be running the project yourself. So you need really, really strong data savvy people and really strong storytellers to take that to take up the helm for that. And it's not for everybody. It's something that needs to grow, and I would say we have a gap in strong data storytelling as a not as a company so much, but as an industry, definitely.
Thank you, Mas. There's one more question there from Michelle, which is for the data lake. Are you building a user interface for every I&A team member to access it?
Yes, we do. So there's two types of interfaces that we have. The first is knowledge management. So obviously we do have a knowledge management platform that's still being built. It's evolving. It's again strong in some areas and being built in others. And that's more for understanding all of any type of research that we have, almost an internal Google. But on the data lake side, we are partnering with our business intelligence services, and they basically are building out the architecture, the raw-based architecture. We're bringing the data and the supply. Almost, if you think about it, we're attaching the hose to the pipe to get all the data stream coming in. That has direct access to our users, but it's done through specific tools right now. So if we want to understand a cross section of all of our results, whether it's understanding brand health or market share changes or penetration shift or distribution changes, that's all piped into a central view, which is, I would say right now, in a sort of kind of static. It's not as dynamic as we want it to be. But as we do a 2.0, we're going to build in much more of the whys, much more of like the due tos, to click one level lower and to do a little bit more root cause analysis that would come into that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miles. So
Sure.
maybe so I can see a lot of comments from the delegates agreeing with you, both from Michelle, Susan, and Jeffrey. So I hope Miles have answered all your questions. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, we have a networking tab when you can reach directly to Miles with a message to ask any follow-up question for this presentation. And right now, I would like to invite you to our booth talks. So we have right now 3 booth talks. First one is from Ramesh on trends in alternative milk, Rival on video feedback, and we have also booth talk from Street Bees on how to get closer to customers using AI and machine learning. So Miles, one more time, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all for listening in. Hopefully it was helpful.
And I see you all in the next session then. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.